What's good, Buffs Nation? How you guys doing? Avanti. Good to see you. So today we're going to be... Buffs Nation. Sorry about that. Today we're going to be diving deep into Colorado's path to the Big 12 championship. We're analyzing every tiebreaker, every scenario, and we're following the official Big 12 rules to the letter. Our analysis is based on the official Big 12 tiebreaker document, which is available at their webpage. Other channels have been offering a derivative commentary without totally understanding what the rules are. They're kind of complicated. This has led to some inaccurate statements floating around, like if Iowa State wins out, they automatically win a tiebreaker against CU if they also win out. And that's technically not true. It's more complicated, it's more undetermined than that, and we're going to break down why and how so that you guys will be able to understand exactly how the Big 12 tiebreaker rules work going forward. Another false statement going around is that if BYU loses a game and it's a three-way tie atop the Big 12, then BYU and Iowa State automatically get in. And that's not true. We're going to break that down. The seemingly complicated document about the Big 12 tiebreakers, we're going to make it simple for everybody in Buff Nation to know exactly what CU needs to happen to get to the ship, baby. This breakdown is not just for hardcore football fans. If you're new to the Buffs or you're just learning about these tiebreakers, we got you covered. So let's get started with how Colorado can claim a spot in the Big 12 championship game. Let me put this the Big 12 standings up for you guys. All right, here we go. And referencing the document just so you guys can see, this is page 1. This is page 2. We're going to get into it. Hold on one second here. All right. So here we go. We got the standings up on the screen. And as of week 10, here's the Big 12 picture. BYU currently undefeated in conference play, and we've got Colorado and Iowa State right behind, each with one conference loss. It's a tight race. Almost anything could happen at this point. And if BYU loses a game with Colorado and Iowa State winning out, then we're looking at a potential three-way tie for first place. And that's just one of the potential scenarios where the Big 12 tie-breaking rules are going to come into play. Again, show you guys. It's basically like a legal document. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's like a simple contract, but it is a contract because these are high stakes. So the rules have to be laid out. They have to be clear. They are. It's just going to take us a second to parse through them. We got Demistocles G. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Not going to lie, bye weeks make me nervous. Well, this was a good one. So this was a good one for Buffs fans. Avanti, good to see you. All right, let's keep getting into this. So the Big 12 has specific rules to determine which teams advance in the case of a tie. The first scenario that we're going to look at is if everything stays as is. That is to say, if BYU, Iowa State, and CU all win out, that would put CU and Iowa State tied for second. Quoting the rules document. Let's put it back up here. If there is not a tie for first place, but two teams are tied for second place, the two-team tiebreaker policy will apply, and the winner will be the number 2 seed. And all that means is there are different tiebreaker rules for, say there was a 4 or 5-way tie, a 3-way tie. there's a different tie-breaking set of rules for that than if there's two teams. So this is saying if there's two teams, second place, we're going to do this particular tie-breaking scenario. The winner will be the number 2 seed in the Big 12 championship. All right, so in this scenario, the first step that you can see on the screen, step A, where it's head-to-head, that is not applicable because Colorado and Iowa State don't play each other. Let me plug my computer back in real quick here. Okay, the first relevant tiebreaker is step B, win percentage against all common conference opponents among the tied teams. So here's where it gets interesting. Both Colorado and Iowa State, by the end of the season, will have the common opponents of Baylor, UCF, Texas Tech, Kansas, Cincinnati, Kansas State, and Utah. Assuming Colorado and Iowa State both win out from here, they would have the same overall record against their common opponents. And that's what we're looking at in step B. So they're basically trading wins and losses against Kansas State and Texas Tech, and they would have presumably identical record against the other teams. So Iowa State and Colorado, if they win out from here, they would each be 6-1 against these common opponents, which is how the document is going through this tiebreaker. So without a clear advantage here at step B, we would proceed to the next tiebreaker step, C. To quote the document again, it's win percentage against the next highest placed common opponent in the standings based on the record in all games played within the conference, proceeding through the standings. When arriving at another group of tied teams while comparing records, use each team's win percentage against the collective tied teams as a group, prior to that group's own tie-breaking procedure, rather than the performance against individual tied teams. I know that sounds confusing, but we're about to break it down. It's not as confusing as it sounds. It's just to make sure they're very clear to account for a lot of different scenarios that could happen. Let me put up the Big 12 standings again here. Okay. All right. So the next highest placed common opponent in the standings, that's going to change week to week as teams win and lose. So we're going to first look at this as if it were today, so that everybody understands how to analyze step C of the document of the Big 12's tie-breaking rules at any given time. So after we go through this, you guys would be able to do this at any given week and understand exactly where the teams sit in relation to a tiebreaker. If it were today, the next highest placed common opponent, it's a mouthful, it would be both Kansas State and Texas Tech at 4-2. You can see Kansas State and Texas Tech are both 4-2. They're both the highest ranked common opponents of Iowa State and Colorado. And the document says, quote, when arriving at a group of tied teams, KSU and Texas Tech currently tied at 4-2 here after week 10, use each team, that would be Colorado and Iowa State's, win percentage against the collective tied teams as a group. This means on step C today, the Sunday after week 10, Colorado and Iowa State would have the same 1-1 record against the next highest ranked common opponents of KSU and Texas Tech. But we have another key phrase from this rule, which I'll put back up here, which is, quote, proceeding through the standings, which means we don't just stop at the top 4-2 group. We have to next look at Iowa State and Colorado against the 3-2 teams. Today, and this is why it matters, today those teams are Arizona State, Cincinnati, and West Virginia. If we assume Iowa State and Colorado winning out in this scenario we're talking about, at this level, we would again be tied. At the 3-3 level, we have currently Baylor, TCU, and Houston. Here, again, only if this were today, because they've beaten Baylor and Houston, whereas the Buffs have only beaten Baylor and not played Houston or TCU. This is kind of like a de facto strength of schedule calculation built into this formula. There's another place in the document where there's a formal calculation of strength of schedule, but here it's just saying, hey, if we got down to the 3-3 group, because Iowa State has played two of those teams and beat both of them, and we've only beat one of them, Iowa State would win the tiebreaker today. But you see how that's going to change every week based on how these other teams play. All right. Me says, so if CU defeats Texas Tech and win out, no advantage over Iowa State. That's not necessarily true, so that you're probably going to have to go back and watch this from the beginning, but we're going through step by step. It depends so much on how the other teams in the conference do, and that's what I'm walking through with you guys, because where we just went through this tiebreaker, and right now Kansas State and Texas Tech are the first tier, that could change next week. And if the first tier is another group of teams, it's going to be Iowa State and Colorado's records against the top tier under them in the Big 12, if that makes sense. I'm going to keep going through it, and we'll get to questions as they come up. But I think if you watch this through and go through it step by step, it's going to make it all make sense to you, because what it's really saying is that in this scenario where BYU wins out, Colorado wins out, and Iowa State wins out, it gets into this complicated procedure, but it is not a lock. It's not a given. Colorado could still get in based on how other teams play. Me says Iowa State losing to Texas Tech doesn't help. No, it definitely helps. I mean, that's everything. That's why we have this to talk about. If Iowa State hadn't lost, we'd still be on the edge of our seat saying that we need help for the Buffs to get in. Now, because they lost and because Kansas State lost, the Buffs are tied for second. If the tiebreaker were today, Iowa State would win. We've gone through up to this point in the video exactly why, so I won't repeat that. I'll let people watch it back. But what we have noticed is that it depends on all of the other teams in the conference, because the tiebreaker between Iowa State and Colorado, it goes to the next best records in the Big 12. So when you have Kansas State and Texas Tech at 4-2, that's a group. You have 3-2 group, that's Arizona State, Cincinnati, West Virginia. That's the next group. You go systematically through those groups, and those groups will change week to week based on the win and loss records. All right, let's keep going through these scenarios. So right now we're in the scenario that everybody wins out from here. And we're going to talk about what happens if Iowa State loses another game. You know, we're going to talk about if BYU loses and causes a three-way tie. We're going to get through all of that. You see that these tiebreakers depend on how all of the other teams stand at the end of the season. It's not locked in, even if Iowa State and Colorado both win out from here. Obviously, if Iowa State loses another game, potentially to Cincinnati or Kansas State, and Colorado wins out along with BYU, then the Big 12 championship would be Colorado and BYU. So everything we've talked about before is assuming that all three teams win out, and we see that how the other teams all across the Big 12 are ranked in the conference, and that's according to their conference wins and losses, which is what's up on the screen, greatly influences how the tiebreaker works for the second seed. So now you all know how to do that part of the tiebreaker yourself. If you watch back from the beginning of this video, go through it maybe one or two times, it will make sense to you. At any given point throughout the remainder of the season, You go through that process and see where we're at based on how the other teams are playing if Iowa State and Colorado keep winning and stay tied. Just come back to this video, watch this first half from here. I'll put a marker once the video posts so that it's very easy. Loop that a couple of times. Any given point, you'll be able to pull up these Big 12 standings and see for yourself what the tiebreaker is as long as they're tied. So again, their common opponents, Iowa State and Colorado's common opponents are Baylor, UCF, Texas Tech, Kansas, Cincinnati, Kansas State, and Utah. So then we look at the Big 12 standings and we do the Colorado-Iowa State comparison from highest ranked down until one team wins. Right now, like we said, it would be Iowa State, but because it is based on the records of those 7 other teams, the calculus can change after any given weekend. All right, let's look at BYU's remaining schedule. All right, hopefully you guys can see this. All right. Now let's look at this scenario. In this case, Colorado and Iowa State both win out from here, but BYU drops a game. This would cause a 3-way tie at the top of the Big 12. And according to the Big 12 rules, this is on page 2. So you see that real quick. Page 2 at the top, multiple team ties. I'm going to take it down just so you guys see we're quoting from the exact document here. Multiple team ties. In the event of a tie between more than 2 teams, the following procedures will be used. After one team has an advantage, and is seeded number 1 in the championship, the remaining teams, okay, so what that's saying is we've got 3 teams tied. If this tiebreaker pops out a clear winner, then we have 2 teams left. They would go back to the 2-team tie-breaking procedure. So kind of complicated, but again, once you get your head around it, it's just saying we have rules for multiple team ties, we have room for 2-team ties. In the multiple team, once we get down to 2 teams, it goes back to the rule for the 2-team ties. Again, just got to wrap your head around it, but they're just being very clear so that they have a way to, pick winners and say, hey, we had these rules from the beginning. There's no bias here. We first look at head-to-head records again, which does not resolve the tie since none of these teams played each other. Iowa State, BYU, Colorado don't play each other, so step A doesn't apply. So we go to record against common opponents. For this analysis, we look at Baylor, Kansas State, Utah, and Kansas. Baylor, Kansas State, Utah, and Kansas are the shared opponents between the 3 teams. So that's a slightly different group than between Colorado and Iowa State. The common opponents of Colorado, Iowa State, and BYU are Baylor, Kansas State, Utah, and Kansas. So here's how it would play out if it were today. BYU beat Kansas State while Colorado lost to Kansas State. Iowa State, in this scenario where we're assuming they and Colorado win out, they would have beaten Kansas State to get to this 3-way tie. No easy task, but that's this scenario. Kansas State loses to Iowa State, causing a 3-way tie at the top. BYU, Colorado, Iowa State. In this scenario, Colorado loses at this point today in the 3-way tiebreaker unless BYU's one assumed dropped game is to Utah or Kansas. So we're going to go through it, but if BYU lost to someone who was not Utah or Kansas and ended up in a 3-way tie, and we went to the tiebreaker, Colorado loses because of Kansas State, because in this scenario, Iowa State beats Kansas State. However, if we're in this 3-way tie, and Iowa State beats Kansas State, but BYU's lost game is to Utah or Kansas, it's going to change the whole formula, and that's what we're going to go through. But the point is that after every week, you're going to have to look through the standings and go through it like I'm showing you guys to see exactly where the tiebreaker is. Of course, we could do update videos as the weeks go on, but going through this step by step is a little complicated, but I think it's going to be good for people to see it is clear, it's not ambiguous, nothing is locked in. Colorado has a phenomenal chance for a lot of reasons we're going to talk about. All right. So if BYU dropped a game to Kansas or Utah, and Colorado and Iowa State win out, then at this point of the three-way tiebreaker, Iowa State would first become seeded number 1, and BYU and Colorado would go back to the two-way tiebreaker. So just like we went through the two-way tiebreaker between Iowa State and Colorado, in this scenario, Iowa State would win based on today, and it would be a BYU-Colorado playoff through the record. And let's look at how that would play out if it were today. And to recap, this scenario is Iowa State, Colorado win out, BYU drops a game causing a three-way tie. Iowa State wins the first part of the three-way tiebreaker at step B. The records of the 3 or more tied teams will be compared based on winning percentage against all common conference opponents played by all other teams involved in the tie. At this point, if at any point the multiple team tie is reduced to 2 teams, it's here, so we're quoting from this document. If at any point the multiple team tie is reduced to 2 teams, the 2-team tie-breaking procedure will be applied. So after ISU is seeded number 1 in this scenario we're talking about, then BYU and Colorado go back to the 2-team tiebreaker rules, which is this page. We would look at win percentage against the common teams of BYU and Colorado. The common teams of BYU and Colorado are Baylor, UCF, Kansas State, Arizona, Utah, Kansas, and Oklahoma State. Remember, in this scenario, we're assuming that the game that BYU loses is to Utah or Kansas, which would mean they would then lose the subsequent two-way tiebreaker against Colorado, since at step B, that we're at, step B of the two-way tiebreaker, we look at common opponents, where if CU wins out, they would have beaten all of the common opponents with BYU. And if BYU lost to Utah or Kansas, we would win that tiebreaker against them. So in these scenarios, we haven't gotten into the official strength of conference schedule, but that would be the next potential level. So again, because these standings, put them back up here, because these standings are going to change after each week, this calculus is going to change. That's just how it is, but now we know how to go through it. If what we have gone through so far doesn't break the ties, then we get into a strength of schedule tiebreaker, and there's an official way to calculate that. Again, it's going to change after each week. I'll put that up on the screen. All right, this is how we calculate the strength of schedule for Big 12 tiebreakers. Calculate the average conference win percentage for each team's opponents by adding the win percentages and dividing by the number of opponents. I've broken it down here. We can go through it. Basically what you're doing is you're looking at the records of everybody that each team has played, their total wins, and figuring out how strong collectively all of Colorado's opponents were, BYU's were, Iowa State's were. You see the results at the bottom of the screen. Iowa State right now, again, this is going to change. Take this down. These are going to change based on every team's record in the Big 12. But right now, Iowa State has the strongest strength of schedule. Colorado has the second. BYU has the third. So again, BYU drops to Utah or Kansas. Colorado has 2 strong legs up on them in that case. So let's pop Iowa State's schedule up here, see who they have left. So we've pretty much, just to make sure we went through all of this, see what Avanti says. All we need is a BYU loss to Utah or Kansas, or Iowa State loss. And either one of those almost lock it in. They almost, they do. They lock it in. So yeah, either one of those happen, I'll do another recap video and make sure that I haven't missed anything. But we're going to get into their schedules and see what those losses could be. Because I don't know, you guys probably think like I do. I think that could happen. Just to wrap up going through this document that we've been going through. Official Big 12 document here. No matter what, CU has to win out. In all likelihood, to make the Big 12 championship. Assuming they do, here are the scenarios that could get them to the chip. This is the part of the video we're going to want to bookmark and come back to. These are the scenarios that could get Colorado to the Big 12 championship. Iowa State, number 1. Iowa State loses any other game. Let's look at their schedule. Iowa State. We've got Kansas, Cincinnati, Utah, Kansas State. The way they've been playing, I'm excited to see all those games. Scenario number 1, Colorado gets to the Big 12 championship, is Iowa State loses any of these 4 remaining games. What's up, Zulus? Good to see you. If you're getting in here just now, you'll have to rewind the video. We've gone through this official Big 12 document, exactly how the tiebreaker works so that anybody will be able to do this. What we've established is that it's going to change week to week. So we're going to have to do this at the end of each week. We've talked about how the tiebreaker would work this week as an example, but what we really see is that the calculus changes week to week. But we have a few locks, and that's what we're talking about here. We have 3 scenarios we're talking about right now that if they happen, Colorado gets in. Scenario number 1 is Iowa State loses any of their remaining 4 games. Any of their remaining 4 games. Colorado's in there. Scenario number 2, Iowa State wins out, but other shakeups in the conference rankings, here's the conference rankings as they are right now, change such that Colorado wins the tie-breaking procedure against Iowa State, and that can happen. There are so many different possible scenarios that I can't go through all of them. We'd be here forever. Everybody's head would be spaghetti. But the point I'm trying to drive home is that it depends on all the other teams, and it's going to change week to week. So even if Iowa State and BYU win out, what the other teams do matter. And we'll talk about at the end of each week, maybe going into each week, what would help change that scenario where Iowa State today wins that 2-team tiebreaker against Colorado if they both win out based on their prior opponents' records. But as those records change, we'll talk about who we need to win and lose for that. But again, hopefully Iowa State drops a game, CU's in. That's scenario number 1. Scenario number 2, Iowa State wins out, but other shakeups in the conference change the calculus such that Colorado wins the 2-team tie-breaking procedure against Iowa State. All right, scenario number 3 that gets Colorado into the Big 12 championship. And Miss Peggy. BYU loses to Utah or Kansas, as Avanti said. BYU loses to Utah or Kansas, even if Iowa State wins out, that would, so say Iowa State, if BYU loses to Utah or Kansas and Iowa State loses, of course we're in. If Iowa State wins out and BYU loses to Utah or Kansas, we went through this tiebreaker already, the whole procedure by the book. You guys will have to watch from the beginning if you hadn't seen it. But as it is today, Iowa State wins out, BYU loses to Utah or Kansas. This would result in Iowa State getting the number 1 seed, and the tiebreaker then between BYU and CU's common opponents would go to Colorado if BYU loses to Utah or Kansas, because all of Colorado would have a better record if they went out against their common opponents with BYU if BYU drops to Utah or Kansas. So there you have it, guys. That's a lot to digest from the beginning of this video to now. I don't even know how long we've been going. We'll stay around and chat and answer some questions and break down different scenarios. It's a lot to digest, but once you wrap your head around it, like I said earlier in the video, if you go through the first part a couple of times, and I'll put a timestamp so we go right to where it is, go through the process. It's not complicated. You'll be able to do it in your sleep. You'll be able to pull up the rankings that I have on the screen after any given week, and you'll know exactly where CU is in the tiebreaker if Colorado, Iowa State, BYU keep winning. Because if they all keep winning, the tiebreaker calculus changes. That's what we've been talking about in this video. That other channels are missing because they're just looking at how it is today, and they're not understanding that every single win and loss for all of these teams potentially matters. And we've kind of demonstrated why in this video, if you go back and watch it. So let's hope that Iowa State and BYU are not done helping us out, and that our Buffs stay focused, disciplined, and play one game at a time until they get it done for Miss Peggy. Because we all look at these teams, those of us who are Coach Prime and Buff super fans, we see the talent. I've been watching highlights. I watched all the Iowa State highlights before their game this weekend. I watched all the Texas Tech highlights. I thought Iowa State was going to dominate Texas Tech. So it just, right after, that was my impression after watching both teams' highlights on the same day back to back. So we know that something could happen crazy any given week. There's enough talent, on each of these teams for explosive plays if we're missing tackles, we're on that not paying attention bull junk, as Deion says. But if we look at CU at their best and any of these other teams at their best, my money's on CU every time. So let's see what you guys are saying in the chat. We got Decepticon. This is like the best video. So many fans are lost on how we get to the championship game. That's why I made it, man. I was watching the videos this morning, and I had gone through this document, and I was like, man, they're oversimplifying it. So I got into it deeper. I realized, okay, it's complicated on the surface. Again, we'll pop it up here. We got page 1, page 2. Page 1 is for 2 team ties. Page 2 is for multiple team ties. And once we go through it like we did in this video, it's pretty easy to understand, but you have to have that key. You got to have that key of the current Big 12 standings to unlock who's going to win in this tiebreaker at any given week. Let's again look at Iowa State's schedule. So they drop, Iowa State losing to Texas Tech, honestly, they could lose to any of these teams. Kansas, Cincinnati, Utah, Kansas State, especially Kansas State. I put Cincinnati right behind them. Then Kansas, Utah, both have enough talent to catch them sleeping just like Texas Tech did. Steffi33, this is so helpful. I am more of a fan of the program than a college football fan, and these playoffs are confusing. Exactly. Hopefully, again, Iowa State and BYU just make it real simple for us, and we don't have to worry about any of this. But even when it is at its most complicated, we broke it down for you guys so that we see it's really not that complicated. It is legalese because the stakes are so high. This is a legal document. It's a very simple contract, but it is saying it is a promise to these Big 12 teams. From the beginning of the year, we thought this all the way through. This is how it's going to go down if you're tied. So on that aspect, it's fair. To cover every base, it's a little complicated, but we see that we're very unlikely to get more than 3 or 4 levels deep. The deepest level we would probably get to would be the strength of schedule. And again, right now, BYU is weaker on strength of schedule. And a lot of good things for Colorado to be very excited about right now, even if Iowa State and BYU win out. All right, we got Steffi and we got Stephanie. Stephanie says, thank you kindly. Watching from Cleveland, Ohio. Let's get Coach Prime. Let's go, Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes. Yes, let's get Miss Peggy to some fine bowl games, to those playoffs. We got Lamond Hunter. Do you think if CU does not get into the Big 12 championship game, that they would be better off getting an at-large bid into the college football playoffs? So I'm so biased, and I know it's going to come down, it really comes down to who's ranked in the official top 12. And that'll be a whole nother calculation we could look at. It's so much more complicated because there's so many more teams involved. Here's how I simplify that question for myself, Lamond. I look at Joel Klatt as a good analyst, and then I look at Aaron Murray. Aaron Murray, former quarterback for University of Georgia. He also does analysis on YouTube. Joel Klatt says there's no way that Colorado's getting in without winning the Big 12 championship. And he's biased. He played for Colorado. But man, sometimes he's hard on the Buffs. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. So I take that Joel Klatt in one hand. I have Aaron Murray in the other hand, who's not biased, who's an SEC guy. I mean, if anybody should be biased towards the SEC, it's a former Georgia quarterback. And Aaron Murray says there's no way you can leave Colorado out of it if they win out. So we want Colorado to control their own destiny, obviously. And that's what we're talking about in this video. Obviously, now we're to the point of the video. We'll talk about anything you guys want to talk about before we wrap it up. But when I think of that question, Lamond, because I think of that too, I just tell myself, Joel Klatt, Aaron Murray, both experts, both have different opinions. We're a long way out from that. If Iowa State loses next week, if BYU loses next week, we're in. So every week we get closer and closer, and we're in such a prime position. I don't see how we don't get in at this point. But I don't want to put, I want to put the cart before the horse. But I think Coach Prime, watching TV yesterday, maybe put on one of his old jerseys and was doing the Coach Prime shuffle, in front of the TV, watching those two games, saying, "Oh, Lord, thank you." I could just picture him. I hope Bucky got a video of it, of his reaction to those games. He might say that he didn't care. He might say, we got to control our own destiny no matter what. But y'all know he was dancing. He was. Let me get my screen fixed there again. Okay. Educator Unpleasant just says yes. All right. Whatever I was saying at that point in time, we're in agreement. Zulus says Texas Tech looked flawed and undisciplined in that game. That's why when I watch their highlights, Zulus, when I watch their highlights from the whole season before the Iowa State game, because I wanted Iowa State to lose to them, but I watched both teams' highlights and I thought there's no way that Iowa State's going to lose to Texas Tech, even though I see a lot of vulnerabilities with Texas Tech. With Iowa State. In both teams' highlights, I was like, Iowa State looks like Colorado would tear them up, in my opinion. Texas Tech looks like Colorado would tear them up. Texas Tech, in all their highlights before the Iowa State game, to me, looked like Iowa State was going to run through them. So I was like, man, I'm not even hopeful for this game, because Texas Tech, you could see the offensive potential, but their defense has just gotten slashed all year by not good teams. So any given Saturday, man, any given Saturday, my friends, a team loses focus. You get a little, the wrong player has a little bug. The wrong motivator is not feeling motivated that day. You know, the wrong guy gets injured, like Travis in the Kansas State game. Everything we've talked about is giving CU a huge benefit of the doubt that they win out. But we're here because this is a fan page, and we're also here because we all know that they have the potential to do it. That talent-wise, we haven't even seen this team come within, maybe 20% of their best. I bet they would grade themselves that they've been playing at like 80 in the 80 percentiles of what they're capable of. And so I could not believe the Iowa State Texas Tech game, but what a beautiful thing, as Bucky says. It's a beautiful thing. And then Kansas State, Houston. Did you guys see Chidozie going on live with his former Houston players? They were hyped, to say the least. All right, Sunfire Brown says, you've been enjoying the channel for the last week or so. Thanks for going through Boulder. Thank you very much for watching Sunfire Brown. I've talked about in all the videos why I'm so happy to be in Boulder, and for Coach Prime to be just dropped here as one of my lifelong childhood heroes is amazing. So I'm going to do whatever I can to bring you guys because you guys see me in the chats of all the different channels because I'm consuming everybody else's content first. I'm a fan first. I only started this channel because DJ Bless One, the best one at I Smoke Hip Hop Live, and Harry B from TLP Sports Club both kind of inspired me to start putting a perspective out there. And so now where I find little gaps, like, hey, I could go to the pep rallies and the buff walks and stream live for everybody. Or I can show you guys around the city so you can see, so recruits could see. Any of you guys want to come visit, you can start to see the city. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get in where I fit in. And today, when I was watching the analysis on other channels of the Tiebreaker, they just weren't going through the document properly because I had already looked at the document. I knew they were skipping over things, and there was a lot of people repeating what other people were saying that was inaccurate. So we went through that very quickly at the beginning of the video. If you guys didn't see, once it posts, I'll put time markers. We can rewatch it. But you guys will be able for yourself to go through the tiebreaker scenario at any given week. Hopefully we're not going to need it after next week. We'll see where we're at. All right, let's go back to the chat here. Let's go. Zulus was talking about Texas Tech looking flawed and undisciplined. I mean, we're going to see, hey, if Colorado dominates them next week, that will say a lot. Colorado beats them by double figures or more, that will say a lot to the college football world, in my opinion. Larry says, see, you got to focus on one game at a time. Exactly. Thank you for subscribing, Larry. We appreciate it. And one game at a time could not be said enough. Again, we're doing this on this channel because we're super fans. We want to know, hey, they look really good. What happens if they win out? Are we in control? Are we out of control? That's the point of this video because we're optimistically looking at it with the realistic mindset that every week is tough. Iowa State probably is legitimately a better football team than Texas Tech. But any given Saturday, you lose your focus. The momentum goes the wrong way. I still think the Nebraska game, that first quarter was just an anomaly. It was the fifth quarter. A lot of these players have played together in one of the hardest environments in college football. Anyway, one game at a time. Larry, you're right. Ernest Ernest Normill says, I was shocked when both games ended up like that. I automatically felt the football gods was doing that on purpose. That's what I think Deion was doing, the Coach Prime shuffle in front of his TV, saying, man, I really am tapped in. Somebody's really looking down on me and doing some miracles, because I could not see either of those games happening, and for both of them to happen, I mean, I think I'm still on cloud nine. You guys probably are too. Like, I was jumping up and down, screaming in the house for other teams that I don't even care about because of what it means for us. So I just want to see what Coach Prime and Bucky and I'm sure the well-off videos will come out. We'll get to see what their reactions were in real time, because that's what I want to see. All right, let's see what else we got in the chat here. Sunfire says, we got a lot in common. Been a fan of Coach Prime since '88 from San Francisco when he made it to the 49ers. He lit the city up. He lit the city up, as the kids say today. We were lit. Oh, yeah. Yep. Same feeling. Same feeling, I imagine. Obviously not being there. But I, as a kid, I followed him from the Falcons to the 49ers. I was too young when he was at Florida State. But I remember watching his Falcons games with my grandfather. My grandfather was a huge Coach Prime fan. And that's how it started for me, watching him with my grandfather, then following his career. But that's awesome that you were in San Fran while he was there. Avanti says, I think Texas Tech defense is weak to the pass. I agree. I don't know if you guys watch the highlights, but their defense is vulnerable to getting slashed up a few different ways. Their line is decent, but I've seen the linebackers and their secondary get cooked by not great teams. You know, I don't want to insult anybody because I didn't play D1 ball, so I'm not going to talk down on anybody playing D1 ball. But again, we're here to compare people who are playing D1 ball as fans, and looking at it that way, I think CU is going to have a good day against Texas Tech. We're going to find out. Oh man, I want to drive down there so bad. It's about an 8-hour drive. Tickets are like $350, $500 a piece, so I don't know about that, but especially after this weekend, I kind of ruled it out. Now I'm back wondering, should we go? Same thing about the Kansas game. Let's see, chat, what's up? Larry says Boulder's a beautiful city. Visited for the first time in 2012. Loved it. Beautiful town. I agree, Larry. I love showing it to you guys who have visited. There's some CU alumni, former players who watch the channel who like to watch the walks through the city just to see how things have changed and like reminisce on their college days. Hopefully, recruits will get to see all the different areas of the city that they could go, and how good the weather is for the most part. We're going to cover the snow though too. We're going to show you guys what it's like in the snow, what we do in the snow. I'm going to have all that for you this year while we're waiting for those bowl games. Judah says, I don't think Colorado ready for Texas Tech home field advantage going to be crazy. I don't know. I haven't been to that field. Matt McChesney, he said he wasn't worried about it. Take that for what you will. Everybody's got their different viewpoint. They got their different bias. I tend to think home field advantage, just like Nebraska. Obviously, the louder the stadium is, the more it matters. But, again, I could be biased. I think I'm going to wait and do my analysis for the game where I'm going to give you guys an official prediction. My prediction, the first formal analysis I did, there's a video up on the page, was, let me see here. Bear with me one second. Yeah, 42-21 is what I predicted for Colorado Cincinnati. So I was off 42-21, but people were telling me I was crazy. They were saying, no way, it's going to be, way close, whatever, or Colorado's not going to win. But I'm going to do a full analysis like that for the Colorado Texas Tech game, and I'll make my official prediction, which I am not ready to do, but knee-jerk reaction right now is that Colorado is going to beat them by 14 plus. I could be crazy. And that's not my official prediction. I'm going to make a video. It'll be documented just like the Cincinnati prediction is. And I'll stand by it once I make it, because I'm going to analyze a lot more than just watching highlights. And if you guys watch the last one, you'll see it's kind of getting into that like nerd technical stats level. But hey, when we got time to crunch the numbers and we're all rooting so hard for the team, I think it's worth doing, so we're going to keep doing it. Zulu says Kansas State should have 4 losses, but we all get lucky. I know. Just, there's so many X factors in our game with Kansas State, and the biggest one to me is Travis. And Travis putting his shoulder down, hurting himself. That was the difference in that game, man. That was the difference. It was. Travis is worth 3, 4, 5 points, Come on. But this is football. This is why the games get played and why we don't just click through the schedule and say, okay, this is a win, this is a loss, whatever. Your best player can try to put the whop on somebody and hurt themselves, take them out of the game, and everything changes. Your whole season could change. So we knock on wood that nothing else like that happens, and we're lucky that Colorado has been as healthy as they have. Coach Mo, I forget the other strength and conditioning coach, but they deserve so much credit. Like, Travis has talked about how they're in better shape than all the teams that they play. And I can see it. I said it before because he just said it on his episode a couple of days ago. Y'all can look at me saying it for weeks, that standing beside these dudes in person and having been around a lot of different college football players going back to Dabo's dynasty in Clemson, where I went to school, standing next to a lot of these dudes, sizing them up, thinking, man, I could tackle that guy, or that dude, if he tackled me, would destroy me. When I'm around the Buffs, they're not all the biggest players. We have got some big dudes. Don't get it twisted. Anquan Barnes, very big dude. BJ Green, not super tall, but his shoulders are like this wide, like to mine. And I'm not the narrowest shoulder. BJ Green's a giant. Chidozie, short, but a giant. Seaton is huge, big boy, but athletic. And that's what I'm saying is the athleticism is different. Like, the biggest dudes look like they can still move and cut. And I don't know the exact right words I'm looking for, but Coach Mo and the other guy have these dudes in such good shape. I think that's got to contribute to the overall relative health of our team so deep in the season. Again, knocking on wood, never take anything for granted. Don't take a day for granted. Don't take a snap for granted. But love to Coach Mo, and I forget the other strength coach's name. But you guys are doing an incredible job. Let's go back to the chat. Zulus is saying to Judah that Colorado is a better road team now, which I agree with. Avanti, their passing game has potential, but their QB has no vision. He missed wide open receivers all the time. Talking about Texas Tech quarterback, I assume, because that's what I see against Iowa State. Yeah, so Texas Tech quarterback. Yeah, right, when we watch these other games and we watch close, one of the takeaways is how different Shador is. We know. It's not like we don't know. But if you get in the world of just watching Colorado college games and you're not watching as much of the other teams because, we all got busy times, this and that, watching games is a big commitment, but when you start to see other players, and don't get me started on Dylan Gabriel getting put in the Heisman conversation with Shedeur and Travis. I mean, that would be a whole nother, that will take me off on a 30-minute tangent, but I will just say that drives me up the wall. Like, that's crazy. I am completely different. I don't see any quarterback better than Shedeur. I won't get mad about the Cam Ward conversation, but I still don't see him being better than Shedeur. And Shedeur says, give the Heisman to Travis. Genty, amazing respect, doing something only one running back has ever done in history. But what I just said is doing something someone else has done in history. Nobody's ever played as many snaps as Travis. All right, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because that's a whole different. Larry enjoying the live walkarounds. Glad to hear that, Larry. I've got a hike up the mountain that we did yesterday. I couldn't do it live because of the reception. I did a little bit of a live at the top, but I took good 4K video of the whole hike. I'm going to edit it together, put some music to it, post that up for you guys so you can see what some of the hikes are like. This picture that's in the background of the screen now is one of the views you get. And right down there, the neighborhood you're looking at, like that's our neighborhood. The beige colored roofs that you can see in the middle of the screen, that's CU's campus. You can see the Pearl Street Mall cutting like a straight line right in front of the campus going from the mountains to the left. Anyway, you can pop up into the mountains right out of the city and get these views, and I want to show you guys. And the potential recruits. Also, in the future, I think when players come, they should start doing these hikes because the altitude does something different to your conditioning, and they're getting it, doing the sprints. Boulder's at a high altitude, but sprint up the top of Mount Sanitas and holler at me. I'll take some of these players if we could get them. We should do that. Let me take some of these players on some of these hikes, and we'll see who could get up the mountain the fastest. Old man love and liberty, or can these players beat me up the mountain? What do y'all think? Okay. Zulu's wishing all the team good health. Zulu's talking about Kansas State game. Everybody faking injuries. Man, because of the altitude. There you go. I mean, it's real. And even, from Kansas to Colorado, I don't know how many thousands of feet of gain it is, but it makes your legs feel heavier. It makes your breath feel shorter. You feel weaker. You get fatigued faster until you acclimate, which takes like a month. So you're not acclimating when you come to Boulder. You could say super, super duper hydrated, full of electrolytes and caffeine. And that would probably offset, hopefully none of the other teams. We might have to edit that out of this video so we don't give anybody the formula. But that's the formula if you guys come visit Boulder to avoid the altitude sickness. Hydration first and foremost. Decepticon saying Reyes, that's the other strength coach. And T, I don't know T. I would know T if you pointed him out to me in a well-off video. I'd say, oh, okay, that's T, but I don't know who T is. I know Coach Mo by name. I know Reyes by name. I just couldn't think of it. But yeah, those dudes, they got these boys in incredible shape. Coach Maurice and Coach Brandon Reyes. Thank you, Larry Formiller. All right, y'all. Well, again, at the beginning of this stream, we went through the tie-breaking procedure as it would go this week. What we did is we went through it in a way that will enable you to go through it for yourself in the future if it's necessary. If Iowa State keeps winning, if BYU keeps winning, if Colorado keeps winning, you guys could come back to the beginning of this video, watch through the little step-by-step we went through, and you'll know exactly where they stand in the tiebreaker, and it is not locked in. The takeaway was, if everything stays the same and those three teams keep winning, what all of the other teams do matters. It changes the calculus of the Iowa State versus Colorado tiebreaker. All those other teams' records. But we're going to hope for Iowa State and BYU to show us some love and give us some help and make it very easy for Miss Peggy. Miss Peggy doesn't want any stress. Miss Peggy wants an easy coast into the Big 12 where we can focus on preparing for the Big 12 and winning it. And then, oh my goodness, can't even get into what would come next. Because, I don't know, but me and Miss Love and Liberty will be there. Yeah, if they make the Big 12 championship and the playoffs, we'll be there. And we'll get you guys whatever coverage and access we could possibly manage. But hey, we're getting ahead of ourselves. But that's what super fans do. That's what we're here for. We're here to talk about the possibilities and believe, as Coach Prime says. So, Crash Out King, what up? What up? We're about to wrap up the stream here. Shake hands with Destiny. Think Iowa State gonna lose to Cincy and KSU? Me too. Me too. I said that a little earlier, like not a 100% prediction, but those are the two. I mean, I want to say I can't picture Iowa State beating Kansas State, but I can. Kansas State has that ability to play really bad, which we just unfortunately did not get from them in Boulder. But you've seen it this year. Let's put Kansas State. Oh, I didn't have their schedule. I just have the top 3 teams' schedule pulled up. Sorry, Kansas State. But yeah, we've seen them struggle against teams they shouldn't, like Houston. So Iowa State versus Kansas State. I think Kansas State is going to have that same edge that they had against Colorado. It's going to be a huge game. It's going to be on TV. You're going to have Dylan at his utmost cockiest. You'll know what I'm talking about. And, Avery won't be able to do the Coach Prime dance in the end zone, but he'll have something to do. And they're going to get up for that game, and I think they're going to beat Iowa State, and I think we're going to coast in. But, knock on wood, man, any given Saturday, it's crazy. That's why we watch. It's a beautiful thing, as Bucky says. Shout out Bucky. We're all here because those well-off videos taught us that you don't just have to wait for Saturday for college football. College football could be 24/7, 365. Thank you, Bucky, for showing us the light. All right. D. Hall says, Coach Prime and them single-handedly keeping Miss Peggy alive. Pause. We love you, Miss Peggy. You're gonna see something good this year. You're about to see something good. I feel it. Shake hands with Destiny, no worries. If you go back to the beginning of this video was just bam, 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 bam. We didn't chat. I went through the tiebreaker as if it were today, just to show you guys how you could go through it any given week, because it depends on all the other teams' records. That's in the beginning of the video. Watch it from the beginning. Go through that for a few minutes. You'll be able to do it yourself just by pulling up the Big 12 standings that I have up here on the screen. And the calculus changes. As the weeks go on, the way the tiebreakers are is they take like Iowa State and Colorado and they say, okay, who have you guys both played? Okay, you played this group of teams. What was your record against this group? And their record is the same. If they both win out, their record will be the same. With Iowa State having the one loss to Texas Tech, and if Colorado wins out, their one loss to Kansas State, they don't look at it as, oh, this loss was to Kansas State, this loss was to Texas Tech. They just say, y'all played this group of teams together, and you both won them all except for one. Same record. Okay, now we go to the next level of the head-to-head playoff. And that is, okay, of the teams that you guys have played separately, what is their record in the Big 12 right now? And right now, it's Kansas State and Texas Tech are at 4-2, and we would have a split against them. Then there's a group at 3-2, and we would split against that group with Iowa State today, which is Arizona State, Cincinnati, West Virginia. Then there's a group at 3-3 today that's Baylor, TCU, and Houston, and Iowa State would win that group. So they'd get choop, choop, choop. You go down these lines of what you have to figure out in these tie-breaking rules. And in the beginning, we put the official documents up on the screen. So we're going through this to the letter of the law. They figured it all out. It's just a little complicated. But once you go through it, you understand how it works. It's not that complicated. You just need the key, which is, what are the current Big 12 standings? All right, with that, guys, again, go back and watch stream from the beginning if you want to see how the tiebreaker went through. Next video I'm going to have for you guys will be an edited hike of Mount Sanitas with some music, just showing you guys, like this picture you see in the background. This is one of the pictures I took up there, just showing you guys with some of the hikes popping right out of the city. So I walk from my house to this hike, which I think could be a good selling point for people who want to visit Boulder, for recruits coming here. It's just a different thing there's different hikes, different trails in different towns. Boulder just has some cool ones if you like that kind of thing. So, all right, y'all. Last comment is Avanti. I hope we keep our foot on the gas against Texas Tech. On Travis's show, he said how Cincinnati scored at the end due to them becoming stagnant because they thought they had the game won. Man, that's a good last comment to have, because I'm with you. I'm with Travis. You can tell Travis and Shador have that same mindset, and they're trying their best to spread that throughout the team, and a lot of the team picks that up. Cam Silman Craig has that mindset. I feel like Shiloh has that mindset. I won't go through and think all the guys that I do think have that mindset, because I think most of them do. But I think when guys start slipping, it's probably not Travis. It's probably not Shador. And it wasn't Deion. And that's Deion's thing, is he's teaching these young men that it's a mindset. It's a decision. It's a decision you make to always be turned on until the clock hits 0 and to run it up. And the more they run it up the rest of the year, the better that looks to any potential at-large situation. So if we do have to get into the college football rankings, then margin of victory and stuff like that is more in bounds than if we just get this easy scenario of Iowa State drops one. We also determined, y'all, that if BYU loses to Utah or Kansas, if BYU loses to Utah or Kansas, okay, BYU, put their schedule up. If they lose to Utah or Kansas and Iowa State wins out, it would be and we win out, that would be a 3-way tie. Iowa State would win that 3-way tie, as it is right now, and we would win the next tiebreaker against BYU. So if BYU loses to Kansas or Utah, and Iowa State beats Kansas State and Cincinnati, we could still get in. We talked about in the beginning of the video, if Iowa State wins out and CU wins out and BYU wins out, it's still not locked. It's still not locked for Iowa State to beat us in a tiebreaker. It depends on how all the other teams in the Big 12 finish. We went through that at the beginning of the video. I thank you guys for joining us tonight. It's always a pleasure to do a live and get to hang out with you guys from all across the country, really the globe. It's amazing how far Coach Prime and the Buffs fan base reaches, and the core values that bring all these people together are beautiful. So I love this community. I appreciate hanging out with you guys. All right, I'm going to quickly answer Jovi's question in the chat. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Jovi says, how does that work? Because BYU beat Kansas State and Iowa State lost to Tech. Okay. So let's pull back up the documents here. We'll go through this one more time. Okay. All right, Jovi. Here's how it would work. If BYU loses a game to Utah or Kansas, and Let's also have, so we have the record here. BYU loses to Utah or Kansas, and now they have one loss. Iowa State has one loss. Colorado has one loss. Everybody wins out from there. Just making sure everybody's with me. Jovi's saying, because what I said is if BYU loses to Utah or Kansas, and there's a three-way tie of one-loss teams, in the three-way tiebreaker, Iowa State would win first, and then we would have a tiebreaker of BYU versus Colorado that we would win. And I'm going to show you guys, I'm going to walk you through how that would work. Okay, so we would be on page 2 of the BYU's tie-breaking rules. Multiple team ties. In the event of a tie between more than 2 teams, the following procedures will be used. After one team has an advantage and is seeded, all remaining teams in the multiple team tiebreaker will repeat the tie-breaking procedure. If at any point the multiple team tie is reduced to 2 teams, the 2-team tie-breaking procedure will be applied. All right, what does that mean? Multiple teams, we got BYU, Iowa State, Colorado, all with one loss. That's multiple teams. Okay, it's saying we're going to use these rules. And once these rules determine a winner, and that's the team it's saying is seeded, then it says any remaining teams, which in our scenario would only be 2 teams. So if there were more teams tied and there were 3 teams still, say there were 4, and you went through these and one of them popped out as the number 1 seed, and you have 3 teams left, you would stay in this group of rules. But since we would only have 2 teams left, we would go back to page 1, which is this group of rules. So we're going to go through it, but I'm just making sure we understand it from the first paragraph. So 3 teams tied, we're in the multiple team scenario. Okay, we go to step A. Step A is the records of the 3 or more tied teams will be compared based on winning percentage in games among the tied teams. If all teams involved in the tie did not play each other, I'm not going to read through all of this because basically step A is saying if BYU and Iowa State and Colorado had played each other, that would matter. But they don't, so step A doesn't matter. They didn't play each other, step A doesn't apply. All right, so we go to step B. The records of the 3 tied teams will be compared based on winning percentage against all common conference opponents played by all other teams. So this is where it gets tricky. We have to look at the common teams between BYU, Iowa State, and Colorado. And let me find where in my notes I've written those teams down for you. Let me just find that list here. Actually, I know another place that I might have it a little more quickly. All right, bear with me, guys. Okay. The common opponents. Common opponents for BYU, Iowa State, and Colorado. So again, in this 3-way tie at step A, BYU, Iowa State, and Colorado never played each other, so we go to step B. Step B is saying, who did all of you play? And in this analysis, we're looking at Baylor, Kansas State, Utah, and Kansas as shared opponents between the 3 teams. Here's how it would play out. BYU beat Kansas State while Colorado lost to them. Iowa State is assumed in this scenario that they would have beat Kansas State. In this scenario, Colorado would lose unless... Am I still going, guys? Yeah, okay, we're still going. Unless BYU's one loss is to Utah or Kansas. At this point, Iowa State would become seeded number 1 because they would win. They would win the common battle between common opponents, between us and BYU. And at that moment, it goes to the head-to-head two-way scenario between BYU and Colorado. So we go back to page 1. So I'm going to recap this. BYU has lost to Utah or Kansas, resulting in a 3-way tie at the top. We go through the 3-way common opponents, and Iowa State is going to win that record. If all the teams win out from here, with the exception of BYU dropping 1. Now we have BYU and Colorado being kicked back to the 2-team tie. Again, step A doesn't apply because they didn't play head-to-head. Then we have win percentage against all common conference opponents. Okay? So now we have the common teams between BYU and Colorado. The common teams between BYU and Colorado are Baylor, UCF, KSU, Arizona, Utah, Kansas, and OSU. So remember, in this scenario, we assume that the game BYU loses is to Utah or Kansas, which would mean they would then lose the subsequent 2-way tiebreaker against Colorado, because at step B of the 2-way tiebreaker, we look at common opponents, where if Colorado wins out, they would have beaten all of the common opponents with BYU. Because BYU, why don't I have, because BYU, wait, they're not on, somehow Kansas State got left off my list there. So, did I miss any other common opponents? Hold on, let me pull up my notes. I got Baylor, UCF. No, I have KSU. We would have lost 1 in that group, and they would have lost 1 in that group. Okay, so I was incorrect because somehow I left Kansas State off at one point in this notes. So who was that? Jovi. What happens now is, since this is a group of common teams and they would have the same record, they would have both, in this group of teams, won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and lost 1. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games total of common opponents between BYU and Colorado. And Colorado lost to Kansas State in that group. We're assuming they win these other games in that group. BYU would have lost 1 in that group. Okay, so actually, now we kick it down to step C. Win percentage against the next highest placed common opponent in the standings based on the records in all games played. So this is now where we go back to the Big 12 standings, however they are when this tiebreaker happens, and now we say, out of your common opponents, who had the best record? And if that is still Kansas State, we will be in trouble. But it's not just Kansas State, though. It's also Kansas State and Texas Tech. So this is how it gets complicated, guys, but this is how you would analyze it yourself if you were doing this, is you would say, how did BYU and Colorado play against this group at 4-2, which is Kansas State and Texas Tech? Then you go to the next group. And then if you were still tied, Then if you're still tied, then we get into the strength of schedule calculation. And this is where Iowa State has the hardest strength of schedule, Colorado next, BYU has last, but that's just based on right now. That's going to change week to week. So we're going to come back and analyze this every week and look at the possibilities. I'm going to have to edit in the description earlier where I said if BYU drops to Utah or Kansas, we automatically get in, because it's not. It's going to be to the C level. No, that's the multiple teams. You got to make sure we're on the right page. This C level. Win percentage against the next highest placed common opponent. So common opponent means opponent that both BYU and Colorado played based on their conference records, proceeding through the standings. So proceeding through the standings, what that means is proceeding through the standings mean that if they have the same record against Kansas, the group at 4-2, then you go to the group at 3-2. Then you go to the group at 3-3. So today, does BYU play Texas Tech? Let's see. No. Okay, so here's how it would go today. Today it would be, the first group is Kansas State and Texas Tech. They have one win and no losses in that group, and we have one win and one loss. I got to be honest with you, there's nothing in the tiebreaker that says, the way that I read the tiebreaker is BYU would win that, because they'd say, no, it's just hard if they both haven't played the teams, because we both have a win in that group, which is technically how it reads. Win percentage. I don't know how you factor in like Texas Tech into BYU's percentage if they never played each other. So that's a question. Maybe I'll see if I could get somebody at the Big 12 to answer. I bet nobody in media has asked them this question. We're getting ahead of ourselves because we're getting way into the scenarios. But what I want you guys to see is that it very much depends on how the other teams are shaking out. At any given time, we're going to this list. We're going to the current Big 12 record to settle most of these ties. So, Hawaii Chris just found the content, randomly popped up. Good to see you, Hawaii Chris. Glad you're tuning in. Patrick Williams, good to see you. Glad you guys were here. All right, so Jovi ended us off on a little question we weren't expecting, but hey, corrected something that I missed. When I'm going through all of these teams and like, who are the common opponents of CU and Iowa State? Who are the common opponents of CU and BYU? Who are the common opponents of all three teams? I try not to let anything fall through the cracks, but this is why we do this. And this is why the chat is awesome in the scenario, because I thought I was about to go through it and show you how I had figured it out. And what I realized is I left Kansas State off of that, where in the scenario that BYU loses to Utah or Kansas, resulting in a three-way tie at the top, Iowa State would win the first round of that tiebreaker. Then it would be a tiebreaker against us and BYU, and it is unclear who would win that, because of our group of common opponents, we would both have one loss. Ours would be to Kansas State, theirs would be to Utah or Kansas, and at that point, we get way into the weeds and we kind of hit a roadblock on step C, because we're comparing the quality of their common opponents. And if Kansas State stays ranked in the top of the rest of the Big 12, but see, if we beat Texas Tech, that's an equivalent win in the eyes of the Big 12 in this group. So we would both have a win against one of those teams. We would have played both of them. BYU, actually, I think we would win because we played both of them. I think, I'll get back to you guys, I think it would go into I'm just not sure. It doesn't say it clearly in the documents. I'm thinking I've read them both 100 times. It's ambiguous. I'm going to ask the Big 12 if anybody's asked them this question and see, because we are at step C of the tiebreaker, and we would be looking at what is BYU and Colorado's record against the next highest common opponents. BYU did not play Texas Tech, but we both played Kansas State. So that might actually eliminate Colorado in that head-to-head. Because they may say, it wouldn't be right, though. But they do say common opponent, and Texas Tech is not a common opponent. Kansas State is a common opponent, and of our common opponents, they're ranked the highest. So I think that would be the answer as I talk myself through this. Win percentage against the next highest place common opponent. That would be Kansas State, so we would lose to BYU in that head-to-head. But if Kansas State's record changes and now the next highest common opponent is Texas Tech, no, they will never be a common opponent. So let's see, who could it be? Who's next? Who else? Did they also play Arizona State? Okay, Arizona State is a common opponent. Arizona State has a 3-2 record. If Arizona State can tie Kansas State, because right now Arizona State's played 5 conference games, Kansas State has played 6. If Arizona State, when they play 6 games, is also at 4-2, now all of a sudden a tiebreaker with BYU would be tied in that first. So you guys, I want you to see how we have to go through it systematically, and when we get to the level that's dependent on other teams' records, it's going to change. It's going to change. And we did determine that if it were today and everything stayed the same, which it's not going to. But if it did, just so we see how we would go through the tiebreaker, we see that BYU would edge us out because of that Kansas State victory and they're being higher ranked than our next common opponent, which is Arizona State. Let's say BYU loses to Arizona State. They're playing them, right? Yeah, BYU schedule, Arizona State on the 23rd. If BYU lost to Arizona State instead of Utah or Kansas, so I think that's what I got wrong. If they lost to Arizona State, we would win that tiebreaker against them. Iowa State would still win the 3-way tiebreaker, be the number 1 seed if everything stayed the same today. But if BYU lost to Arizona State and we beat Arizona State, they would then be the next highest common opponent, and us having beat them, we would get in. So you see, every scenario, you got to go through, and we showed you at the beginning of the video, we didn't stop and go back and forth. We plowed through it. So when we go back and watch the beginning of this video, you'll get just running straight through how do we go through these steps one by one. Excuse me. What do they mean? How do we understand this legalese? Because it's written to be very specific so they can tell teams, hey, we thought of every scenario before the season, so where you think it's complicated, we've just covered every base. Like I got confused on the fact that, well, Texas Tech and Kansas State are tied at 4-2. So if we beat Texas Tech and BYU beat Kansas State, we both beat one of those teams. But I needed to read it more clearly. It's a common opponent. And only Kansas State would be a common opponent with us and BYU. So in that scenario, BYU would get it. Now again, if Arizona State becomes 4-2, if they win their next game, now we have common opponent, and we need Kansas State to drop, because we would have 2 common opponents where we won one, lost one. But no, they won one, lost one. So then we would go to the next tier of teams. So we're starting to get spaghetti brained, but I think if you guys watched the beginning of the video, you'll see how to go through it. And I think that it's going to get more clear as the weeks go on, because I do. I'm sorry, Iowa State. I don't think you can beat Cincinnati and Kansas State. I don't think you can. I'm just going to say that. BYU, I think you could win out, but man, that pressure is going to get heavy every week. Y'all give us some help, BYU. Make it easy for Coach Prime and Miss Peggy. We want to get in that Big 12 ship. So, all right, guys. This is Love and Liberty, live from Boulder. It's an honor to be with you guys as always. Hope you have a great rest of the night. We'll see you soon with some more good Buffs content. Go Buffs!